Maya held the heavy gold pen in her hand, her fingers trembling slightly as she looked at the white paper on the desk. Beside her, Daniel sat with his head bowed, his shoulders shaking as he pleaded quietly for one last chance. "Maya, we can fix this," he whispered, but his voice sounded like a distant memory to her. Standing behind Maya was Victor, a man who smelled of expensive cologne and power. He placed a steady, confident hand on her shoulder, marking his territory. With a sharp, final stroke, Maya signed the divorce papers. She did not look back at the man who had loved her for a decade. She only looked forward toward the light. To understand why Maya walked away, we must go back to when love was enough to fill their stomachs. Years ago, Maya and Daniel lived in a tiny apartment where the walls were thin and the heater barely worked. But in that small space, there was so much laughter. They shared dreams over simple bowls of rice, promising that they would conquer the world together. Daniel would hold her hands and tell her she was his queen, and back then, Maya believed him. They were poor in money, but they were deeply connected in spirit. Every kiss felt like a promise, and every shared struggle felt like a brick in a solid, unbreakable wall of devotion. But as the years passed, the cracks began to show in their foundation. Reality is a heavy thing, and it started to weigh Daniel down. No matter how many double shifts he worked at the warehouse, the bills piled up faster than his paycheck. Maya began to look out the window at the neighbors' new cars and designer bags. She started comparing their flickering light bulbs to the bright chandeliers of the wealthy. When Daniel came home exhausted, smelling of sweat and grease, Maya no longer saw a hero. She saw a man who was failing to give her the life she deserved. She hid her growing resentment behind a wall of cold, stony silence. Then the better life walked through the door of her office in the form of Victor. He was everything Daniel was not: wealthy, composed, and effortlessly generous. From the moment Victor saw Maya, he noticed her beauty, but more importantly, he noticed her hunger for more. He began to stop by her desk, offering small kindnesses that felt like heavy treasures. He offered her help with her career and introduced her to a world of fine dining and soft silk. "A woman like you shouldn't be worrying about rent," he told her softly. He offered his hand with no strings attached, or so he said. A tiny seed of greed was planted in Maya's heart. The seed grew into a trap of constant comparison. Every evening, Maya returned to her dim apartment and saw only lack. She saw the peeling paint and felt Daniel's work-stressed hands, which were now too tired to hold her properly. One night, Daniel missed a very important anniversary dinner because he had to stay late to earn a small bonus. Maya sat alone in the dark, feeling completely invisible in her own marriage. Meanwhile, Victor's voice echoed in her head, telling her she was a star. The attention he gave her became a dangerous temptation. She began to wonder if her loyalty was actually a prison. She wanted to fly, and Victor had the wings. Soon, the subtle hints became a direct offer. Victor invited Maya to high society events where the floor was made of marble, and the people spoke in millions. He gave her expensive jewelry and designer dresses, telling her they were just tokens of appreciation for her hard work. But as he draped a diamond necklace around her neck, he whispered the words that finally broke her spirit. "You don't belong in that small, gray life, Maya. You deserve much more than a man who can only offer you his tiredness." Victor raised the stakes, showing her a world where she would never have to check a price tag again. Maya began to pull away from Daniel completely. The distance between Maya and Daniel grew into a wide, cold ocean. At home, the warmth was replaced by an icy silence that neither of them knew how to break. When they did speak, it was only to argue about money or the late hours Maya was keeping. Daniel was not a fool. He sensed that his wife's soul was drifting away to a place he could not follow. He tried to bring her flowers, but she only looked at them and thought of the expensive bouquets Victor sent to her office. Instead of talking to her husband, Maya began to confide all her secrets, her dreams, and her frustrations to Victor instead. One rainy afternoon, the line was finally crossed. Victor presented Maya with a set of keys to a luxury car, parked right outside her office. It was a gift that cost more than Daniel earned in 3 years. Maya knew that accepting this meant changing her life forever. She felt a surge of guilt, but the excitement of the power and the luxury was much stronger. She took the keys and hid them in her bag. That evening, when Daniel asked her how her day was, she looked him in the eye and lied. She told him she was tired and went to bed early. The lie felt easy, and the guilt began to fade away. tension finally reached a breaking point during a heated argument over a simple grocery bill. Daniel stood in the middle of their small kitchen, his voice cracking with emotion. "I am trying my best, Maya. Don't you still believe in us? Don't you remember the dreams we had?" He looked at her with eyes full of hope and desperation, waiting for a sign that she was still his partner. But Maya hesitated. She looked at his worn-out shoes and then thought of the marble floors in Victor's penthouse. Her silence was a blade that cut through the last thread of their marriage. That hesitation told Daniel everything he needed to know. The final decision came shortly after. Victor made it very clear that he was tired of waiting in the shadows. "You have to choose, Maya. You can stay in that basement of a life, or you can come with me and be the queen you were born to be. You don't belong there anymore." Maya looked at her reflection and saw a woman who was tired of being poor. She convinced herself that she wasn't being cruel, but that she was simply choosing herself. She decided to walk away from the man who had built her up when she had nothing. She packed her bags, called a lawyer, and headed back to the courtroom. Life after the divorce felt like a beautiful dream. Maya moved into a luxury apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the entire city. Her closet was filled with the finest silks and furs, and her vanity was covered in gold-plated jars. Every morning, she woke up to the sound of soft music and the smell of expensive coffee. She had a driver, a personal shopper, and the constant admiration of the people Victor introduced her to. She walked with her head high, feeling like she had finally won the game of life. The memories of the small, cold apartment and the crackers for dinner felt like a nightmare she had finally escaped. With her new wealth came a rapid social elevation. Maya was no longer the quiet accountant. She was the stunning companion of one of the city's most powerful men. People who used to ignore her now scrambled to get her attention. She attended galas and sat at tables where the wine cost more than her old rent. She loved the envy she saw in the eyes of other women. However, she noticed that her old friends from the neighborhood stopped calling. When she did see them, they felt like strangers from a different world. She told herself it didn't matter. She was rising to the top, even if she was losing her roots. But slowly, the golden cage began to close. Victor's generosity came with a hidden price that Maya didn't notice at first. It started with small suggestions. "Wear this blue dress tonight, Maya. The red one is too loud," he would say. Then it became, "I don't think you should visit your mother this weekend. We have a very important meeting." Victor began to make every decision for her, from what she ate to who she spoke to. At first, it felt like he was just taking care of her, but soon, it felt like he was managing her like a piece of expensive property. The control tightened, one small rule at a time. The first real humiliation happened at a high-end charity dinner. Maya was sharing her thoughts on a business topic when Victor interrupted her with a cold, sharp laugh. "Oh, Maya, darling, leave the thinking to the professionals. You're just here to look beautiful," he said in front of 10 influential guests. The table erupted into light, polite laughter, but the sting in Maya's chest was very real. She felt the heat rise to her face as she forced a tight, fake smile. For the first time, she realized that in this world of luxury, her voice had no value. She was a trophy, and trophies are meant to be silent. As the months went by, the isolation became complete. Victor made sure Maya had no support system left. He told her that her family only wanted her money and that her old friends were beneath her now. He became her entire world, her provider, her boss, and her only companion. Maya found herself sitting in her massive apartment, surrounded by beautiful things, but with no one to talk to. She didn't realize that she was trapped until she tried to leave for a walk and was told by the security guard that Victor preferred her to stay inside. Meanwhile, far away from the marble towers, Daniel's life was beginning to change in ways she couldn't imagine. While Maya was living in a gilded cage, Daniel was making a quiet but powerful comeback. After the divorce, he had hit rock bottom, but the pain had turned into a fierce fire of determination. He moved to a new city, took a risk on a small business, and worked with a peace he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't chasing riches, he was chasing his own dignity. Slowly, his business grew and he found stability. He looked healthier, his eyes were bright again, and he was no longer the broken man Maya had left behind. He had finally stopped chasing her ghost and started building a life that was truly his own. Back in the penthouse, Maya began to notice a terrifying pattern. She watched how Victor treated his employees and his past business partners. They were all disposable, like paper cups. Once they were no longer useful, he threw them away without a second thought. One evening at a party, Maya saw Victor talking to a younger woman in a way that felt very familiar. He was using the same soft voice, the same promises of a better life. A cold shiver ran down Maya's spine as doubt began to creep in. She realized that she wasn't the love of his life. She was simply the current model of his success. The tension between Maya and Victor finally exploded one night when she questioned him about his late hours and the new woman. Victor didn't get angry. He simply looked at her with a look that was so cold it felt like ice. He laughed, a short, dismissive sound that made Maya feel small. "You're questioning me, Maya. In the house I pay for, in the clothes I bought you." He stood over her, and the power dynamic became crystal clear. He didn't see her as a partner. He saw her as a debt that he had already paid. He told her to go to her room and stay there until she was grateful. The final truth was revealed a few days later. Maya tried to apologize, hoping to regain some of the warmth they once had, but Victor was finished with the game. He looked at her bluntly and said the words that shattered her world. "Maya, I didn't choose you because I loved you. I chose you because I wanted to see if I could take you. I liked the challenge of breaking your loyalty to that poor man. Now that I've done it, you're quite boring, actually." He told her she was always temporary, a project to pass the time. The illusion of her winning cracked and fell to pieces on the floor. The fall was faster than the rise. The next morning, Maya woke up to find her credit cards declined and her designer bags packed by the door. Victor had replaced her overnight. A new, younger woman was already sitting at the breakfast table, wearing one of the silk robes Victor had bought for Maya. There was no warning and no apology. Victor didn't even look at her as his security team escorted her out of the building. Her new life disappeared like smoke in the wind. She stood on the sidewalk with 2 suitcases, realizing she had traded her soul for a life that was never truly hers. In her desperation, Maya tried to reach out to the people she had pushed away. She called her mother, but the conversation was awkward and filled with long silences. She tried to visit her old friends, but they had moved on with their lives. They had been there for her when she was poor, but they didn't know the woman she had become. They didn't trust her anymore, and they certainly didn't have space for her drama. She stood at the door of her old neighborhood, feeling like a ghost. She was completely alone, standing in the rubble of the bridge she had burned down with her own hands. One afternoon, Maya saw something that caused her heart to stop. She was walking past a small, beautiful park when she saw Daniel. He looked magnificent. He was laughing, looking at a woman beside him with eyes full of genuine, deep love. They weren't surrounded by luxury, but they were surrounded by peace. Daniel looked like a man who had everything he ever wanted. Maya realized that the woman beside him was receiving the loyalty and the future that should have been hers. The final realization hit her like a physical blow. She had left the only man who would have ever died for her. Maya returned to a small, cramped room she had rented with the last bit of cash she had hidden away. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed and reflected on every decision she had made over the last few years. There was no anger left in her, only a heavy, suffocating clarity. She saw the moments where she chose the diamond over the heart. She saw the moments where she lied and the moments where she was cruel to the man who loved her. She understood now that she hadn't chosen herself. She had chosen a shadow. She understood that she had made a terrible, irreversible mistake. Maya began to rebuild, but it was a slow and modest life. She found a basic job as a clerk and lived in a small room where she did her own laundry and cooked her own simple meals. There was no admiration from strangers and no designer clothes to hide behind. There were no shortcuts anymore. She lived with the constant weight of her regret, watching the world go by from a distance. She was no longer a queen, and she was no longer a trophy. She was just a woman who had to live with the price of the trade she had made. This was her new, quiet reality. Our story ends here, with a lesson that many learned too late. Maya did not just leave a man for a better apartment, she left loyalty for a fleeting illusion. She traded a love that was real for a luxury that was hollow. She forgot that gold can be cold, but a true heart is warm forever. She spent her life building a house on sand, and when the wind blew, she was left with nothing but the dust. As you go about your day, remember this story. It is better to eat crackers with someone who loves you than to eat steak with a man who owns you. If you had the choice, would you choose love or luxury?